Welcome to the St. Croix River Association's latest installment in our Water Resources Forum. Today I have the privilege of introducing Jean Schaeppi-Anderson from the National Park Service. Jean has been the Cultural Resource Specialist for the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway for over 10 years, helping to document the history and archaeology of the St. Croix River. She has worked for the National Park Service as an interpretive ranger and a cultural resource specialist for over 34 years at 10 National Park Service areas. So please welcome Jean Schaeppi-Anderson.
Thank you. Good morning or afternoon at this point. I'm over here. And welcome to our online audience. Today I'll be talking about the Army Corps of Engineers and the St. Croix River and how we've discovered they're more intertwined than we originally had thought. And because logging history is so important to the St. Croix, I have to throw in some logging history as well. So, when people tend to think of the St. Croix, they tend to think of this wild, the scenic river, and they tend to start glamorizing it as a natural, pristine place untouched by man, which really isn't realistic. We obviously have this dam that's here on the St. Croix, and obviously changes it drastically from what it originally was with the falls in this location. When people tend to attribute reasons why the St. Croix isn't the natural river it is, though, they tend to go back to the logging era. For 75 years, almost all the rivers in the watershed were used to transport logs downriver to the sawmills or shipping them out to other locations. And you have to imagine that that did have an impact on this river. How can you have all these logs in the river and not do some changes to the shoreline? How did fish get around with all those logs jammed in there so tight? We don't really know, but yes, it probably did have a difference to the river. And then you also have the dams that were built. Nevers Dam, of course, was the largest of these dams, and they changed the siltation patterns, holding them back for a while. They also made cuts in the riverbed from when the gates were opened, and those cuts can still be seen in a number of locations on the river. We also have the land itself adjoining the river. When you cut all the trees down, when you leave slash piles behind, when wildfires sweep through the area, it's bound to have some kind of effect. So there probably was erosion occurring to at least some degree. So naturally, in 2007, when some of us were out in the river and we noticed these structures coming up out of the low water, we were like, oh, logging dams. They must have been built by them to help get the logs down the river. But when we looked closely at them, they did not look like logging dams. Loggers were short-time workers. They knew that they had infinite time that this was going to happen. And so to see something this complex with those log ends put into the riverbed at an angle and then intermixed with rock just did not seem to make sense for loggers. So we started going to look to see who else might have made these. St. Croix, as we all know, was a navigable river from Taylor's Falls south. And in 1866, the Army Corps of Engineers set up an office in St. Paul, Minnesota, because Congress wanted the upper Mississippi improved for navigation and also the tributaries to the upper Mississippi. So that seemed like the likely spot to look at. And if you go to the histories of the St. Paul office, this statement is made there, that the St. Croix has been under improvement by the Corps for a longer continuous period than any other Wisconsin river, and it also is the most controversial. So we seem to have a smoking gun that the Army Corps of Engineers is probably our likely suspect. So we started going online to look to see what records existed for the Army Corps. And this is from an annual report of 1875. And if you look at figure 16 here, it has a resemblance to what we see today on the St. Croix River. So we knew we were on the right track, that the Army Corps was probably the builders of our wing dams on the river, and so we set out to learn more. We had a grad student, Dan Ott, who was going to school in Chicago, so we had him go down to the National Archives. And he started finding these notebooks. And so we took a look at some of the notebooks. And included in one of them was this diary that had hard work pitching camp, the ground being covered with heavy brush and rank vegetation. Got camp fixed about 5:30 p.m. I put Kerrigan to clear the dam of brush and weeds. The dam is about 1,000 feet long with 5 water gates, 3 of which are closed. And here's the dam. The dam they're talking about is what is the location of today's Borden Dam. So over here, this is the dam in the river, and here's shorelines drawn out. And then they have measurements from the dam to the shore and from benchmarks that they established. And then here you can see the 5 gates with rock cribs in between. And there's evidently a roadway made up of logs on the top that they could cross over. We also found drawings like this, which are complicated and messy, but seem to be showing the shorelines. They're also showing heights of the land from the water. Some of them we can approximate where they are, some were not quite as certain. We know that they were doing these surveys on the upper river because they were looking for places where dams could be installed. And the dams they were looking at installing would help improve navigation or if hydropower in the future. But it was a way to hold water back, so in case they needed to send water down during the navigable season, they could deepen the river's water flow. So this drawing here, this is near where the Moose River comes in on the upper St. Croix, the Low Gordon Dam. And evidently in here, they thought they might be able to put a dam. But then one of the other interesting that shows up is it says here, Indian village, cultivated lands. And then that it's popple and pine on the shoreline. We never knew that there had been an Indian village up there. So there's also some of these other interesting tidbits that we found in some of these Army Corps of Engineer records. So what we then did is we hired a contractor, US West Research, Anthony Godfrey, to start pulling together history of the Army Corps' involvement with the St. Croix River for us. And one of the things to start us off is the work that they did here on the St. Croix River. So they did a survey in 1874. We have found no records of that survey in existence. And they used that survey to create a plan for how they were going to make the river more navigable. And what they thought they had to do is remove some things from the river, contract it a little bit, and they thought they'd be able to establish a 3-foot channel from here to the Mississippi River for a cost of about $22,000. What they didn't realize was 1874, when they did this survey, was an extremely high water year. And so when the water started dropping, things did not look quite as easy as it had in 1874. This shows what they planned to do based on that 1874 survey. So they thought that if they built 10 dams, varying from about 100 foot, 12.15 miles below the falls. It's one of the problems today. Where did they measure from as the falls? We don't know that. But you can see they have one at the Apple, one just above Stillwater, that if they built these 10 dams for about 3,750 linear feet, and they also removed some old boom piers that were in the river and cut down some overhanging trees, that they would have a 3-foot channel, and they thought they could all do it all in one season. Sounds like easy work. But they quickly started rethinking that. So they had to admit that there was at best 2 feet of water in the river. There were obstructions, low places, boats had difficult time getting through, and that they would need to modify their plans. And so then by 1880 or so, they're now up to what they project to cost about $109,000 to accomplish this 3-foot channel. So the first stage was to remove obstructions. They hired private contractors. Captain Knapp was from Osceola, knew the river, so they brought him in to start pulling stuff out of the river. One of his first things that was shown in the paper was he removed 9 piers from Clark's Slough. This would be by Clark's Island below Folsom. And that there they had stood as part of the original boom structure that was on the river. And according to them, the piers were 20 feet across the bottom and were monsters of their kind. But it wasn't just boom piers. This shows the report for that same year, 1879, of what was removed from the river. So you have 2,360 snags, 1,832 stumps, 523.5 cubic yards of rocks, 5,715 leaning trees, 32 cribs, 68 logs, 16 piles, and they also put in 1,200 linear feet of protection on bends that were sloughing off, caving bends in the river. So just in 1879, you look at the amount of work that they had done on the river, and they were already changing this. This isn't the natural river if you do this much work to it in just 1 year. The next step after they were removing things is they moved on to building things. So they began construction. So this is Folsom Island. Nicely, they labeled the island here for us. So they built a closing dam here to keep the current trying to go on this side. They put wing dam up here to try to curb it. Another closing dam over here. And then they reinforced the shoreline. And this is from Google Earth showing, you can see today the island, this is evidently all connected still, but it's been eroded. And this is probably that closing dam's remnants over there. And then they had showed there were sandbars over here, and you can see there's still vestiges of sandbars over there. That was 1883, that drawing. This is now up to 1897. They had to come back and do additional work here. And so they had to improve this dam. They reinforced that whole island. They worked on this dam, and then they had to reinforce the shoreline over here from erosion. And in here, they said that before they even started work on repairing the dams, they removed another 250 snags and logs out of the channel in front of this island. And then they went into the state park and were quarrying rock and cutting down brush to use to do this work here. And that they had permission from George Hazard, who was the head of the state park, to do this. And among the stories told by Wyman Folsom was some of the rock that was removed from Minnesota Interstate included the foundations of a 17th century fur trade post. And it was then put out on the island. So in total, 40 cords of rock and 49 cords of brush is what they used to reinforce this island area in 1897. So now we're going a little further downriver. This is the closed slough area. So here's the dam across the channel. And I think that has to be the channel here that they closed off. And you can see that they put in 2 wing dams here and here, which probably are this, and may have something to do with this sandbar down here. Here's another one. This is down by the lime kiln by Sweezy's Landing. And here it's a little harder. The lime kiln is probably right in here somewhere. This island and stuff in the wing dam or closed dam there, I couldn't find. But this bar is probably this. And this may very well be that. And this closing is probably why we're not seeing any real direct connection going on here between the slough back here and the main course of the river there. So you can see that the changes that they made to the river are still affecting the river today. That while they're not intact as they were, that they're still having an impact. Now this drawing is from Captain Allen gave to Captain Knapp and said, this is what I want you to do at Cedar Bend. He didn't tell us where at Cedar Bend he wanted this. So we can see, you know, here he's talking about how to protect the shoreline, the slope, what he wanted to put in there, and that he also wanted a dam built, and that it was by these 2 islands, but I haven't been able to figure out yet what those 2 islands are. So in some cases we know what was there, where it was, but not what was put there. In this case, we know what they wanted to put there. We just aren't sure where. We do know that the Army Corps of Engineers, at least on the Mississippi, developed a standardized plan. And that's what you're seeing over here. This is what they would do. They had a whole chart for how to compute what you needed and how to do it, depending upon what size of the dam you thought you needed to move the water at that location. Now they're referring to brush mats, is what's in between the rocks. And when we look at what still exists in the river today, they appear to be more logs than brush. So we don't know if there was at one time brush in between here, and that brush has rotted away, and all you have are the larger logs that survive, or if in this river there were so many snags, deadheads, leaning trees, others available, that that's what they used instead of brush mats because it was just easier for them. So we don't really know, but looking at what we've got a lot more logs than you would expect from the diagram, at least here, from the Army Corps of Engineers. So there was a third stage. So we've removed obstructions, we've built things, now we're going to push the sand around. So they did it in 2 ways. They built this little scraper, and this could either be towed by horses walking along the shoreline, or it could be connected to a boat, and then the scraper would be dropped and it'd just be pulled to push the sand around. So it's not actually removing sand, it's just pushing it in locations. They also built dredge. This dredge boat they called the St. Croix. She was used both on the St. Croix River and elsewhere. They specifically mentioned the Chippewa River. And they increased the size of the pipes that were pulling, that could suck out the sand over time. And they also, at this point, she was being towed by barges. Eventually, they would put paddle wheels on her to make it easier. And there were, primarily it's below Stillwater that they dredged. One reason is she had a draw that really couldn't go upriver. So the 3 areas that they were doing dredging on the lower river were by Hudson. So you can see in here, these are the areas they planned to dredge, and then the sounding levels for the other areas. This is the Catfish Bar, and that they plan to build a dam here, and then they also were going to do some dredging in this area. And the Kinney. So down by the Canary Canoe. That was the last area that also needed dredging in order to be able to establish their 3-foot channel. So by 1890, the Army Corps of Engineers feeling pretty good about what they've accomplished on the river. Practically permanent, they believe now, and they think it should be a navigable river. But remember the logging industry that was going on? Well, that's complicating the life of the Army Corps of Engineers at the same time that they're trying to establish this navigable channel. This document here, oops, refers to a canal. So evidently, the logging companies, we think, took what was probably a slough and canalized it, made it so that it was a channel that boats could be sent up and down, in part because they want to send their logs down through this part. So evidently the canal needed work. And so in this case, the Army Corps was coming in here to protect the shorelines of the canal so that it would continue to function.
Do you know where that is?
It's down between Marine and Stillwater. I have to get the map. The other thing that was going on were the booms. Now, you probably all are aware of the boom site. So that's where the boom house is. So that's where today's wayside, the boom site is. And then these are some maps showing the boom itself, which are in the water and are regulating the logs going up and down river. Well, in this one, it says the old steamboat channel and the present channel. So by the placement of the booms, they actually moved where the boats are having to travel on the river because they obstructed the old channel. So there's various letters back and forth between the Army Corps and the boom company trying to work out deals and agreements for some of these booms. This is the Wisconsin Central Bridge, so the high bridge and the piers, the pillars of the river. And you can see up to here, you still have the storage booms, shear booms. So the boom site actually keeps going upriver. And here's Arcola, and there's booms shown up here across the river. So it's a pretty complex system that they have in the river, and this is complicating what the Army Corps is trying to do. And so there's various threats of lawsuits. Legislation is enacted at the request of the Army Corps of Engineers, saying that the boom company can't do anything without the permission of the Army Corps of Engineers because they're obstructing navigation. And so it's definitely occupying time for them. And then right at the same time in 1890, where they're saying things are looking pretty good, at that same point, the logging company built Never Dam. Reason being, try to prevent jams in the Dalles area by holding back water and logs and only sending through enough at a time to get it safely to Stillwater and therefore not jamming up. The only problem is when they close the dam at Nevers, you aren't getting water downriver. And so as a consequence, you have logs that are getting stranded because of the shallow water. And this is part of the boom site here. These are part of the pilings in the river for the boom. But you also get boats that are getting stranded. This is one of the tourist boats that was trying to go upriver. The plan was they would go upriver to Taylor's Falls, give a nice scenic trip. Then these people would catch the railroad, pick it up in Taylor's Falls, and go back to the Twin Cities. Nice excursion for the day, makes good money. But if the boat is stranded out here, and this is by Cocos area, for 5 hours overnight, obviously he then has his passengers weighted off, transported by another means. He's not making money, and so boat usage on the St. Croix is becoming rather haphazard. So the Army Corps is getting very frustrated by it all, and it says due to logging ice, because the ice was also impacting some of the dams when it would hit it in the spring, and lack of consistent boat usage, they don't think the government should waste any more money on the St. Croix River. Here's a summary from 1916. So they said that they've now dredged approximately 84,000 cubic yards. They built approximately 19,000 linear feet of wing dams and bank protection. And they removed about 14,000 snags, stumps, and logs. And that they completed the work in 1900. And that no work has been done since 1911. And then their expenditures has been about 156,487. So a fair amount of money, a fair amount of change. You can't deny that, that this is a different river from the work. But your work is never done, and people are always out there wanting you to do more work. So in 1917, we find this for emergency work needed. And so they had to do work at Pine Island down by Marine. They repaired a dam there. They built a new dam there as well. They also built 2 dams at Cedar Bend. And they repaired one of the dams near the log kiln, or the lime kiln. And so they did that summer. They also, while they were out there, removed another 59 sweepers and leaners and 154 snags. We're assuming this is different from deadheads. At the same time, you're having correspondence about deadheads. So deadheads are logs that the loggers intentionally put in the river, floating downriver. For whatever reason, they sink, probably damage or they get caught in something. And periodically, the logging companies would come through and try to collect deadheads. After the boom site closed, they intentionally went back and said that they had collected the deadheads from the river. But throughout the 20s, the 30s, 40s, and even still today, deadheads are still found in this river. In the 20s and 30s, people were making money by retrieving the deadheads, having them sawed and selling out the wood. So that's another factor in the river that they never actually refer in any of their documents to deadheads. So we don't know if they're part of the snags or if that's still natural trees and that's totally different from the deadheads. In 1926, the Army Corps made a map of the St. Croix. It's a nice map. It's helpful when you're looking at, where islands and things were in the river at that time. But it did not help us at all when it comes to what did the Army Corps do to the river, because they don't document their own work on this map. Here's Folsom Island. I don't see any closing dams up there. Here's Closed Slough. This is probably what's left of that closing dam that they built there, but it's not listed as a dam. There are a couple places on the map where they seem to indicate what may have been a wing dam, but compared to what we know they built on this river, it's not there. So we have not found any maps that show the work that was done on the river, just those sketches like some of the ones I showed you. So for the rest of the 20th century, the Army Corps has a couple wars that take place during there, so that distracts them from the river. They also have proposals that are being thrown their way. One of the big proposals was for a canal to connect Lake Superior to the Mississippi River so they could have commercial barge traffic moving between the two areas and then shipping the stuff straight out through the Great Lakes. And there were different plans for, connecting to going up to the Brule, going up west to here. There were some that only included part of the St. Croix and used the Kettle or other rivers to go up and down. They'd be presented. Congress would tell the Army Corps, go study it. The Army Corps would write a report. saying, we don't think this is financially feasible. It get put away. Another 10 years down the road, somebody would say, wouldn't that be a great idea? And the Army Corps would pull their plans out. They take another look, again, write up the plan based on current conditions, but obviously it never happened. There are also some dams being proposed at this time. Nevers Dam, which was above the St. Croix Falls Dam, was built by the logging company and had no hydro purpose. It was just to hold logs. Well, when logging went out, the dam here in St. Croix Falls purchased Nevers Dam. And they were looking at one or two ways of using it. One, just to hold another pool to make their work more efficient, and they thought they could maybe enlarge the generators on their dam and make more power, or they could turn Nevers Dam itself into a hydro dam, and there was plans drawn up to make it bigger and turn it into a hydroelectric plant. But at the same time, north of there, up by the Chisago-Pine County border, there was another group proposing to build a dam to provide power for the dairy farmers in the area, the Kelsey Markham Dam. And so that was also being floated at the same time, and there's lawsuits going back and forth between the two and the Army Corps as to which was the better project and made the more sense. Obviously, neither one was built. There was also a proposal for a dam down here by the mouth. I'm assuming it would have had a lock in it because the idea was that they could flood going up the river, and that would improve navigation by building a dam down there, and you would also help potentially for flooding on the Mississippi. Well, the decision was that no dam on the St. Croix was really going to make a huge difference to flooding on the Mississippi, so you couldn't justify it for that. So it was strictly navigation, and by this time, you know, we're not a high navigational river anymore. There's not much commercial traffic using the river. So therefore, there's not a lot of pressure, though there is pressure. They're talking about we should have the navigation improved so that our pleasure boats, the big pleasure boats from downriver, can make it up to Taylor's Falls. So there is stuff going on, but it's not strong enough that it makes Congress or the Army Corps do much of anything. So this is their summary from 55. So that 3-foot channel that we talked about, this is where all the wing dams were built and stuff, was completed in 1900, cost $131,000. But then after that, for the area below Stillwater, they got a 6-foot channel, and that required additional dredging and they also had to do some work on some wing dams down there to get this 6-foot channel below Stillwater. And then when the Mississippi got its 9-foot channel, it was decided that because the Mississippi backs up to the St. Croix, it would pretty much make a 9-foot channel anyways. So let's just kind of say we've got a 9-foot channel. But from even though they say it is being maintained at project depth, some of the writing seems to indicate that that may not have been totally true. But nonetheless, so they have a 9-foot channel, and these projects are all in place and done by 38. And the cost for these projects by 1947, $150,000 for new work and $131,000 for maintenance work. So after that, we're not too sure. There's some dredging that appears like it may have happened in the 60s. But other than that, the Army Corps is basically done with the river. And with the creation of the second Croix National Scenic Riverway, that basically stops the further work on the river. And actually, the Army Corps gets ordered, because they were still working on an idea for a dam on the river at that time, and we're told to halt and desist. So what the Riverway then has been doing is, we did this contract in 2014. So some of the material you see here is what's been collected as part of that contract. We're close to the end of it now. So it's not done yet, but the The draft looks like this, so this is probably pretty similar to what it's going to look like when it's done. And then this summer, in the month of June, we're going to have archaeologists here, and they're going to be a mix of submerged cultural resource archaeologists who normally work on shipwrecks and land-based archaeologists, in part because we're not sure what the water level will be in June of this year. And they're going to try to document these structures that are in the river still today. And so by trying to piece together some of those sketches, some of what we have seen in the past, we're going to send them out and try to not only GPS locate them, but also give us an indication of how they're made and what still survives of the actual wing dams themselves. There are no photos that we found. The National Archives, either in Chicago or Kansas City, the Army Corps working at all on this river. There's pictures of them on the Mississippi, but so far none have shown up for the St. Croix. And as I said before, no map has shown up where they actually pinpoint where they did their work and what they did at the different locations. By 2016, what we hope we'll have is an overview and a map based on what they've located from the archaeological work. And then what we hope to do is nominate those structures to the National Register. Now, one of the things that we hadn't going into this plan really thought about, and one of the things we're kind of throwing out there is, now we know that some of these survey records exist out there, and do they have value, and how much value, and should we be doing more with them? The problem with them is that they're hand note sketches with pencil on paper. When we originally went and photographed them at the National Archives, we were just doing quick photos. So these aren't as good of photos as you probably could acquire with work, but the documents are not sharp, clear, precise documents. So one of the questions is, how valuable is this type of information to river researchers, and should it be pursued, or is it just good to know that it's there in case questions come up in the future? And some of it, like I said, we have photos of some of these at the Park Service, but at this point we haven't done anything with them, and some are, see, this one, it's getting pretty hard to read over there. Well, this is of Stillwater, and shows the bank of the river at that location. So it's showing some of the sawmills that were there and docks that they had, and sorting sheds and things like that along the river. So that's one of the questions for feedback to the Park Service is, how valuable do people think those are? So that's what we've learned about the St. Croix and the Army Corps of Engineers. And that the Army Corps has had a much bigger role on this river than we realized when we went into this whole project. And we hope that it's going to be valuable to have this knowledge, not only for historians such as myself, but also for researchers out using the river today. Questions? Maybe.
I should know this answer, but I don't. Is there any history of fish surveys on the St. Croix before and after the Corps of Engineers?
Not to my knowledge, no. Mm-hmm.
That's major habitat.
Yeah. If they're taking out that much snags and all that kind of stuff, that's gotta have changed. And mussels and everything else. I mean, it just seems amazing. We kind of blamed everything on logging over the years, but now you've got both of these groups out there doing things. So it's amazing we're intact as we are.
Any other questions for Jean?
There's a submerged structure below the swing bridge. We'll see that.
Okay.
I had a picture of that. I'll send that to
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll have to look and see. And there's, in the stuff, there was information about the swing bridge. that they demanded that, the Army Corps demanded that it be a swing, and how much of a swing it needed in order to allow for boat traffic going through, and how kind of the final blow to people was when the Osceola Bridge was put in, and it wasn't going to have either a lift or a swing, that they figured that was the end of navigation for the river.
I had Dave mentioned this earlier, sort of in the late. Have you tracked an economic flow of goods throughout the history of the St. Croix, not just the mechanism of travel, but the how much tonnage has gone through, and both from an economic driver, how many millions of dollars of materials have been from fur trade to logging? Who's done that work?
I don't know if anybody's done that work. Fur trade, I don't know that anything, I've never seen anything in writing. You have to go through probably the individual posts and see what records they have. The Army Corps, to an extent, was tracking this. So they're, in their different computations, they're counting how many boats are using the river and how much people, passengers, and material, goods are going back and forth. And then they're including the logging, so how many logs are coming downriver, and the boats associated with rafting logs. So you've got all those boats that are using the river as well. And so some of that you could probably piece together without a huge amount of work. But for the early stuff, I don't know if that's even possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.